Good morning, everyone. My name is Brandon Tucker. I am a Policy Director for the ACLU of Tennessee. This week, with the passage of Senate Bill 228 on the Senate floor, a bill to exclude trans youth from participating in youth sports, a House floor vote upcoming, and a subcommittee hearing today for House Bill 578, a bill prohibiting medical care for transgender youth, it is evident and clear that the Tennessee legislature has once again focused its extraordinary power to harm, stigmatize, and erase the trans community. We have been vocal, we have been clear about the harms, and today we respond again. Please send questions through the Q&A feature. Please include your name and outlet along with your question, and we will take questions at the end of all the speakers once the speakers have concluded. Today I'm joined by Fox Schweiger, a college student and native Tennessean, Aly Chapman, co-chair and policy coordinator for GLSEN Tennessee, Chris Sanders, executive director for the Tennessee Equality Project, Joe Woolley, CEO and National LGBT Chamber of Commerce, Chase Strangio, deputy director for trans justice at the ACLU LGBT and HIV Project, and Cathryn Oakley, state legislative director and senior counsel for HRC. I would like to begin with the comments from Fox Schweiger.
Hello, everyone. Before I start, I think it's important that I go over some basic concepts. The language we use to talk about gender is an incredibly important part of the conversation. Trans women and trans feminine people are people who are assigned male at birth, then realized they were not men or boys. Trans men and trans masculine people are people who are assigned female at birth, then realized they were not women. Non-binary people are those of us who, no matter what sex they were assigned at birth, realize they do not completely fit into either box of man or woman. Transgender applies to anyone whose gender does not align with their assigned sex. A trans girl is not a boy dressed up like a girl. She's a girl just as any other girl in her class is. The language of gender and the way we interact with it is something that is constantly evolving, so it is important to listen and use respectful language when having these conversations. I could talk about gender for hours, but I'm here to talk about my experiences as a trans man who grew up in Tennessee. I'm currently a freshman in college, but I went to middle and high school at a private school in East Tennessee. I began my transition at the beginning of my freshman year of high school. For most kids, this is already a time of heightened stress. While most of my friends and peers were quick to adopt my new name and pronouns, the administration and the teachers were not. I was outed multiple times by teachers and administrators and pulled into meetings with the highest level admin in an attempt to intimidate me out of using the bathrooms on campus. I was forced into counseling and told directly that my existence made people uncomfortable and that my school's community was not ready to accept me. Teachers made multiple comments on my body, comments they would not have made to or about a cisgender student. On any overnight trip, my roommate's parents had to sign off on their son spending a night in the same room as me. Because this was a private school, I did not have any of the same protections as a student in public school. The admin at my school did not allow me to play sports, so as to not upset the other students or their families, yet I was still required to have 2 sports credits to graduate and get my diploma. I am in the unique position of having gone to a school that implemented rules remarkably similar to what SB 228 is trying to accomplish. Experiencing discrimination every single day has extreme effects on a person's health. I experienced both physical and mental health struggles that stemmed from the constant stress of existing in an environment that was explicitly opposed to my very existence. I have wonderful friends and family who served as a support system for me, but I know a lot of trans kids who do not have what I have. Trans kids without a support system will experience even more harm. I find that many conversations about these anti-trans bills focus on how trans women are a threat to cisgender girls. This is completely false. In fact, trans women face a disproportionate amount of harassment and violence. These conversations also ignore the existence of trans masked people like myself. If I were still in high school, these bills would force me to play on a team of cis girls and use the girls' bathroom, which nobody wants. I, of course, can only speak to my own personal experience, but I know a lot of my experiences are shared by trans students all over the country. I recognize that I am a white trans man and that a trans person of color or a trans woman will face different compounding struggles. I do not speak for the entire trans community's experiences, but I hope that sharing my own will help stop these laws that are directly attacking trans children and will have devastating effects. Thank you.
Thank you, Fox. I would like Aly Chapman from GLSEN to follow.
Hi. As the board chair and policy coordinator for GLSEN Tennessee, I have studied the data extensively on LGBTQ children in a school and community context. Predatory policies that segregate children's bodies will result in humiliating and invasive indignities, not only for our trans students who are already participating in sports or considering it. This could also apply to any girl who always runs faster, looks stronger, or doesn't quite fit the profile of what someone else deems the appropriate gender expression. And if students currently receiving evidence-based, medically appropriate care have their treatment abruptly interrupted by criminalizing their healthcare, this will have devastating results in the classroom, hallways, on the playing field, and in their homes. If you speak with these kids, parents, caregivers, and the many supportive teachers of transgender kids, they will tell you the real consequences of these policies may cause irreparable harm and even death. This is not hyperbole. What else do we know? For our transgender students, 75% of them feel unsafe at school, and they also experience more harassment, bullying, and victimization than their peers. In fact, 16% of the students reporting in Tennessee said they were physically assaulted because of the way they look, dress, or speak in their gender identity. We also found that a majority of school-based mental health providers lack competence in addressing the unique healthcare needs of transgender students. These valuable school resources will have an even heavier burden working with students who, before this discriminatory legislation, already needed extra TLC. The reality is these kids will be at an ever-increasing risk for bullying and harassment, isolation, and mental illness. Instead of legislating based on sophomoric understanding of biology, we must consider the true value of equitable education, social and emotional learning, resilience building, and that supporting our most vulnerable children is just the right thing to do. Schools are the centerpiece of our communities, homes away from home for our kindergartners through our seniors in high school. The science also shows that school-based support, such as inclusive school policies, teachers and staff who are supportive of LGBTQ students, student-led clubs, and LGBTQ inclusive curricular resources can positively affect school climates for all students. Thank you.
Thank you, Aly. We'll now hear from Chris Sanders.
Thank you, Brandon. In my job, I get to travel the state working with the best equality advocates in Tennessee. So I'm going to bring you their words so that you understand that people in East, West, and Middle, urban, rural, and suburban Tennessee are working against discrimination. Morgan Robertson, a trans woman from Weakley County in West Tennessee, did not have time to supply remarks because she was busy yesterday meeting with her legislators. But what I can tell you is that Morgan has more wisdom, love, and patience than these bills deserve, and that those strengths allow her and advocates like her to sustain this work. So here are some voices from around Tennessee. Luke Arnold, a college student from Hamlin County in Northeast Tennessee, writes, "I wish our legislators understood how many LGBTQ plus people there actually are that they represent. And I hope they realize passing discriminatory bills will only further hurt our community." Michael Finch and Brandon Thomas, a transgender and cisgender couple from Smyrna in Middle Tennessee, write, "As native Tennesseans, these bills make us feel unwelcome in our home state. We wish legislators knew that our family deals with the same struggles and wants the same things as any other family." Dr. Leticia Flores from Knoxville, who is an ally, writes, "I know these youth and families are not the monsters that the legislators make them out to be. The youth are simply trying to be happy and content with themselves, and their parents are doing their absolute best to care for their children like any other good parent would." Julie from Clarksville describes herself as the proud mother of a trans child. When her son transitioned, they met with several professionals, a general doctor, an endocrinologist, a psychiatrist, and a counselor. The professionals followed ethical standards of care put in place by many organizations, and the legislators could reach out to professionals like the Vanderbilt Transgender Clinic in Nashville and trans people. Mark Buchanan and John Hart, a couple in Dickson County, write, "I wish Tennessee legislators understood the profound damage their discrimination causes in our youth." And finally, Sean Sammy in Memphis writes, "These bills are direct attacks on me, my friends, and my community because they discriminate. These bills treat us differently because of who we are. That's wrong. I know Tennesseans are bigger, better, and smarter than that. These bills are misplaced priorities, and I wish legislators knew these bills are hurtful to my community and discourage my friends and family and professional colleagues from moving here. Now I'll have their full remarks available if anybody wants those, and I'll drop my email address in the chat. But these voices are from every corner of Tennessee. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. Can we hear from Joe Woolley next?
Thank you, Chris. Thank you, everyone. But especially thank you, Fox, for speaking today. One of the very few trans voices that we finally heard in this discussion, and it's very important that we hear more trans voices of the ones being affected by this legislation. So just thank you again, Fox, for coming here today and speaking. Joe Woolley, the Nashville LGBT Chamber of Commerce. We advocate, educate, and connect on behalf of our individual, small business, corporate, and nonprofit members for promoting the values of equity and diversity in business in society. With that in mind, we have organized an open letter of Tennessee businesses opposed to discrimination for the last 4 years, and we have another letter out now that is growing steadily with businesses signing on as they learn more and more about this discriminatory legislation that's moving forward. We plan to release this letter officially early next week with comments from business leaders who have signed on to it. We'll let you know more information when we're ready to announce the details of that. In this role of organizing this letter, we operate as a de facto statewide chamber with signers and businesses engaging across the state. From Memphis to Bristol, Clarksville to Chattanooga, Tennessee businesses are consistently speaking out against discriminatory legislation that harms the state's reputation on inclusion and diversity as it relates to our ability to attract, nurture, and retain talent in tourism business. These businesses strongly embrace diversity and inclusion because they want everyone who works for them or does business with them and their families to feel welcome and safe as their authentic selves, not just at work, but in their daily lives as they participate in their communities. Fairness, equal treatment, and opportunity are central to their values because they care about their employees and the customers they serve. These values also affect their bottom line. That's not just me telling you this. This is every notable economist telling you diversity and inclusion is the way of the future in business. I talk to businesses almost every week that are looking to move here from other states. Tennessee is a great place to do business, but the one thing that businesses are concerned about in moving here is, will their employees feel welcome and safe? And LGBT employees and their families, or straight workers and their LGBT families, are concerned about moving to this state. There's just no other way to say that. And everything that Tennessee has going for it, this is the thing that we have working against us when it comes to attracting and retaining businesses to stay here. We also are a hot place for tourism and convention business. Every part of the state has a strong convention business. But when bills like this are introduced, and then, God forbid, when they pass, this is the sector of the economy that feels it first. It's not just Nashville that people want to come and see. It's every corner of Tennessee that is bringing visitors to the state, especially as we come out of a pandemic. These places deserve to be fully competitive for meetings, events, sports, and leisure tourism. Competition among cities and states for tourism business is feverish, and our communities cannot afford a mark against them when they're bidding for events because of the headlines the state makes on anti-LGBT discrimination. Our hospitality tourism industry and that economy has been hit harder than any other sector of the economy due to COVID-19. So many have already gone under and the rest are hanging on by their fingernails. This sector, the tourism and convention industry, will feel immediate impacts if this bill passes and if other bills are debated and talked about that are even worse in nature. For reference, the adoption bill passed last January cost 14 conventions immediately to pull out of Tennessee. We expect more conventions to pull out if the athlete bill passes. And then we'll be debating other bills after that. The harm to the economy is real. We're telling legislators to focus on what matters relief from COVID, building our economy back up to what it was, and continuing to help businesses and people prosper in Tennessee, not discriminatory legislation. Thank you.
Thank you, Joe. We will now hear from Chase Strangio with ACLU.
Thank you, Brandon, and thank you to everyone who is joining. My name is Chase. I am a litigator at the ACLU. I have been working on challenging legislation similar to the bills that are moving through the Tennessee legislature right now. But I'm also a transgender person and a parent, and I want to speak both about the incredible dangers of these bills on a personal level and then the many legal consequences that will flow from their passage. In high school, I was an athlete and sports saved my life. I would not be here today. I would not be able to do the work that I do without that opportunity. And it is this opportunity that is being taken away from trans youth with bills like this. The ability to connect with their peers, to find an outlet, and to survive into adulthood. And for what? I think the most important thing is that we're harming kids in a context where there is no problem to solve. And in so doing, risking hundreds of millions of dollars. We know that bills like this violate the Constitution and Title IX. I'm currently litigating a challenge to Idaho's law that looks exactly like the law that passed through the Tennessee Senate. And the district court enjoined the law because it violated Title IX, it violated the Constitution, and it violated the rights of transgender and cisgender women and girls because it imposed sex stereotypes. We know that this is going to be challenged in court. We know that the Biden-Harris administration is going to enforce federal law consistent with the Supreme Court's holding in Bostock, putting Tennessee's federal Title IX compliance at risk and risking the state hundreds of millions of dollars in education funding, if not billions. And in hearings, what we've heard over and over again is that there's not even a single transgender athlete currently competing in Tennessee, and yet the state is willing to put all of this money at risk. I am deeply concerned for the message that this sends to trans youth. And if any trans young people are harmed by this law, the ACLU is ready to stand by you and bring this fight to court. I also want to talk about the healthcare bans that are also being voted on today. I cannot stress enough that when we take away healthcare, when we make healthcare a crime, healthcare that the American Academy of Pediatrics supports, that the American Medical Association supports, that the American Psychological Association supports and deems necessary for the health, well-being, and survival of transgender youth, if we take that care and make it a crime, kids are going to suffer and some kids are going to die. That is a fact. And so right now what is happening is we are having lawmakers considering bills in the abstract that we know are going to have devastating, if not deadly, consequences on the health, well-being, and lives of transgender young people across the state. And I think that it is important that we not lose sight of the individuals who right now are looking to their government, are looking to their lawmakers to find out if their lives are going to be deemed worthy, because that is ultimately what this is about. Kids who want the chance to grow up, as I have had the luxury to do, and live safely, comfortably, and wholly in their bodies, are now having to question whether or not those opportunities, not just for their rights, but for their survival, are going to be taken away. I am standing by to support any young person in Tennessee who needs our support, but I hope that it never comes to that and that these bills can be defeated before the inevitable harms from their passage will flow. Both the anti-trans sports bills and the medical care bans are unconstitutional. They will invite litigation and they will hurt a lot of people.
Thank you, Chase. Our final speaker, Cathryn Oakley from HRC, and following her, we will go to question and answer.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for having me today. And particular thank you to all of the other panelists who've already spoken. I know that these issues are really challenging, and I'm glad that we've been able to illustrate for folks who've joined us today about what the personal costs are, what the legal costs are, what the financial costs are, what the human costs are of these bills as they're moving forward, and how much they really will hurt Tennessee and Tennesseans if they are enacted into law. I'm going to just take a few minutes to put what we're seeing here in context on the national stage. Since 2015, when marriage equality was before the Supreme Court, we have seen an influx of anti-LGBTQ legislation in state legislatures around the country. In 2015, it really was about marriage equality and religious refusals. And that was the year, as folks may remember, of the Indiana RFRA. When that argument didn't work, when Indiana experienced significant reputational and economic harm as a result of moving forward with this anti-LGBTQ legislation, the next year our opposition shifted and there was a huge emphasis on anti-transgender bathroom bills. That was the year of HB2 in North Carolina and other similar bills across the country. Again, HB2 is a great example of a state that moved forward with a policy that they thought was winning politics at the time, but that did so much reputational and economic harm to the state that it had to be amended. And the state has still struggled to rehab its reputation. And in the years since, we've seen our opposition try a variety of different things, more targeted religious refusals. And last year and this year, our opposition has really settled on a place that they think that they can win, which is targeting some of the most vulnerable members of the LGBTQ community, trans kids. And as my other panelists have outlined, the two big kinds of bills that we are seeing move across the country, both last year and this year, are anti-transgender sports bans and bans on trans youth being able to access affirming medical care. Of the almost just over 70 bills that we have filed this year that are specifically anti-trans, about half of them are anti-trans sports bills and 25 are anti-trans medical care bans. These bans, as my other panelists have already explained, are absurd. They are not based on actual problems that are happening in Tennessee or elsewhere. And of course, Senator Hensley said as much this week when he said, no, that there was no actual problem that was being addressed in Tennessee, and that this was about a hypothetical problem that could be happening in the future. And I think the context that I just laid out is really important when we're looking at a bill like this, right? For all of the reasons my panelists have already explained, these bills can't be justified using the arguments that proponents have put forward. The only thing that could justify putting forward bills like this is discrimination against the LGBTQ community, specifically trans people, specifically children. These bills are about discrimination. That is all that they are about. They are not about addressing a real problem. They are not about trying to create a real solution. What they are doing is creating a problem and harming trans kids in the process. These are simply the newest iteration of the same anti-LGBTQ bills that we have been seeing for the last several years. And Tennessee, like other states that have considered and passed this kind of legislation, should Tennessee pass this legislation, it will find itself on the wrong side of history and paying the same kind of consequences that the other states who have moved forward with this kind of legislation have paid. Thank you very much.
Thank you. We are now asking individuals to please put your questions in the Q&A feature. Please include your name and outlet, and we will wait a few moments to allow any questions to come in, and I will direct them to the proper recipient. I will begin and allow Joe Woolley, if you have anything to elaborate on Jesse Mayshark's question from the Compass in Knoxville. Are any of the tourism and convention organizations in the state taking positions on this legislation, either publicly or lobbying in private? If you have anything to elaborate on that question. You're muted, Joe.
Sorry about that. It's a great question. Yes, tourism and convention businesses are speaking out. Convention and visitors corporations are speaking out publicly. The Nashville Convention and Visitors Corporation has signed the open letter. They're a founding member of the Tennessee Thrives Coalition, which is a coalition of businesses, over 500 businesses that have signed on saying discriminatory legislation has no place in Tennessee, and Tennessee needs to remain an open and welcoming state for everybody. The Nashville Area Convention and Visitors Corp is actively engaged on this, but as are other convention and tourism organizations across the state. I've spoken to people in Pigeon Forge, Chattanooga, Memphis. It really does affect the entire state. To tie this though to Nashville specifically on conventions, conventions are 40% of the Nashville tourism economy. 40% of our tourism comes from conventions. 1/3 of all tourism business, 1/3 of all tourism business in the state is produced out of Nashville, Tennessee. Visitors still travel outside of Nashville to many locations when they come to Nashville for their convention. So it affects all of the Middle Tennessee economy when Nashville is hurt. Nashville is not the only place that is affected. It is all parts of Tennessee. Nashville is at the top of the convention and tourist lists on where to go. Every list, we're up there. Everyone else that competes for tourism will be targeting Nashville in the passage of this bill to give them a stronger argument on why they should receive that convention business in that more equitable and welcoming location. It's already happening. You can already see it in the organizations that bid for conventions. That Tennessee is talking about this and looks on the verge of passing this, conventions will go elsewhere. They will not take their attendees to a place that is not welcoming. That speaks for large-scale events. The NFL draft last year, or 2 years ago, was one of the biggest events in Tennessee history. It was one of the best drafts. The NFL has said that in history as well. We killed it with the draft. It was a great time, huge boom for Tennessee and our economy. If we want to see an event like that again, discriminatory legislation cannot pass. The NFL, FIFA, the NCAA have all issued or have issues with these bills. They have all gone out and said they will really carefully consider coming to locations that have these bills in place. We're bidding for the 2026 World Cup to come to Nashville. FIFA has said they have a big issue with discriminatory legislation in place with where they go. We need to keep these things in mind. If we ever want to see a Super Bowl, we need to keep that in mind. The NFL has said that. We all love our basketball tournaments down on Broadway and all over the state. We need to keep that in mind. The NCAA has said we don't go where discrimination exists. We are about to step in front of a speeding bus and get ran over if we are not careful. We have seen the ramifications. $3.76 billion is the conservative estimate of what North Carolina lost in the bathroom bill. Tennessee has set itself up to lose even more than that if we're not careful with this discrimination.
Thank you, Joe. For Chris, we have a question from Selena Haynes at Connect. What are the next steps to passing these measures or passing the athletes bill in the House?
Sure. Right now, it's held in the Senate. They've passed the bill, but they are getting ready to transmit it to the House. And then it would go through calendar and rules to be scheduled for a floor vote. As of this morning, it had not been scheduled for a House floor vote. I mean, I suppose theoretically it could happen tomorrow, but I don't think they want to take up all their Thursday in a rush debate on that. So I think it'll probably be early next week, but we will continue watching it today to see. Then there would be a floor debate and vote. And then it would, if it passed, which looks highly likely at this point, it would be transmitted to the governor. And of course, we're all familiar with his comments just dripping with hyperbole in support of this bill. So we're on a very quick, dangerous path, I think, but I think it's really only a matter of about a week that the bill could be finalized. You know, there is still time for individuals to contact their own member of the Tennessee House. And if anyone doesn't know how to find your member of the Tennessee House, please reach out to me, info@tnep.org, and I'll be glad to help you with your message, whatever. Make calls to their offices. If you are trans, let them know you are trans when you make their call, if it's safe for you to do so. If you are parent of a trans kid, please self-identify in your call to your legislator, but make it real and personal and local for these legislators. Is that what you need, Brandon?
Thank you, Chris.
Okay.
Absolutely. Chase, Stella Yu with the Tennessean has asked that they've received a lot of emails from readers who are questioning the science surrounding testosterone levels and the effect of testosterone therapy on suppressing and increasing the level. Was wondering if any of you could direct me to certain studies on this and talk about the science behind gender-affirming care.
Yeah, so thank you for the question. I think first, to put in perspective, this is a wholesale ban on participation in sports. It has nothing to do with testosterone levels. It has nothing to do with the impact of testosterone. This is a ban on students from 5th grade through 12th grade participating at all. And so I think that's one of the things that caused Idaho's bill to be struck down, was the extent and the breadth of the bill. And so while people may have questions about testosterone, that has no bearing on this particular piece of legislation, because it is a sweeping and wholesale ban on participation by trans women and girls, which means that a 5th grader in Tennessee is subject to more stringent rules than are in place at the Olympics and at the IAAF, which is now called World Athletics, at every elite level. So I think that's an important piece of context. The other point I would note is that the studies that deal with the impact of testosterone suppression on the bodies are all dealing with studies on adults. This is a bill that targets kids that may or may not have gone through puberty, kids that may or may not be suppressing their testosterone as part of medically recognized treatment. And so there is no data to suggest that we should be taking information about non-transgender people who are adults, or the impact of testosterone suppression in very limited contexts, and translating that to kids. As someone who is litigating these cases and worked with experts, we have 10 expert declarations dealing with this issue in Idaho, and the court found that there was no basis for the suggestion that trans women and girls have some sort of unfair advantage, and that legislation of this kind is necessary, which is precisely why it was enjoined as unconstitutional. The breadth showed the animus in the bill. It is not connected to science, and what it is targeting kids who want to participate in sports, many of whom haven't even gone through puberty. And no one can suggest, at least into the prevailing norms of science, that there is any typical performance differences prior to puberty, even when looking at just non-transgender boys and non-transgender girls. The other thing that is really hard to miss here is that the very healthcare that is designed to treat transgender kids is being criminalized in a simultaneous piece of legislation that's a companion to the sports bill. So what we have here is a clear effort to eradicate transness, to target trans young people, that is so out of step with both the medical science, which shows that the incidence of self-harm, the incidence of anxiety and depression go down substantially when trans youth are affirmed in their gender and given access to the healthcare that is also being suggested to be criminalized in pending legislation. And so when it comes to the science is clear. For bills targeting kids, that there is no basis to exclude trans girls and women, young women, from sports, and that restricting access to healthcare is going to lead to catastrophic health consequences. Every major medical association agrees. In Idaho, in the Ninth Circuit Appeal, the American Medical Association, the American Academy of Pediatrics, the American Psychological Association all weighed in to make clear that bills targeting trans kids in sports are harmful and that there's no scientific basis for them, which again underscores the constitutional problems and Title IX violations behind these sports bills. And there is no data on kids. We don't study kids in this way. What we do know is that the data that exists shows that kids who have access to affirmation, including participating in activities consistent with their gender identity, saves lives, and that looking at the performance differences between elite athletes who are cisgender men and cisgender women has nothing to do with what is going on in youth sports in Tennessee or anywhere else. And we also know that there's so much discrimination against trans youth that barely any are able to participate in sports at all. So this is so out of step with what we know to be true in science, and certainly what we know to be true as a matter of law.
Thank you, Chase. Aly, Kendall Crawford from WPLN is inquiring about the anti-trans healthcare measure. Are there any specific measures regarding healthcare that are concerning to you? If you could speak as a parent on why this the healthcare legislation is harmful.
It's a great question. So I think that from my perspective, both as a parent and as a part of GLSEN Tennessee, that by interrupting current medical care of any sort, so it shouldn't be reduced just to hormone therapy or mental health care. You know, what I see happening is that you have children who are on a healthy course of care that is approved and managed with families and medical providers. By interrupting that, you know, for me, I see that in the school day or the school year, that you have these children who are moving through their life treated, and really it does have positive impacts scientifically that have been shown, that it ameliorates some of the consequences of not receiving care for mental health specifically. That you're going to have these students then who go into the classroom and suddenly they don't have the care and support that they had, say, the day before. If this is, you know, if this has an emergency statement where it's effective right at this moment, you are going to have children who are already receiving puberty blockers, and that would be catastrophic for them. And then that will also open up the door for more bullying and harassment because they may not present the way that is correct for the way that they identify. So I think that what's really important is to take a step back and see that's really a small component of it, but we need the social systems and the environments and these children in context. Just collectively, we need to make sure that they're all protected. So that's what I see as the danger of it. And that I think it's, as anything, this is a private matter with families and children and doctors. It does not belong in schools or through legislation.
Thank you, Aly. Fox, we have another question from Jesse Mayshark at the Compass. It sounds like your peers were less discriminatory than school administrators. Is that a fair statement? And can you talk a little about levels of acceptance among your own peer group versus older generations?
Yeah, so I can say that I also surround myself with people that I knew would be accepting of me. So that's not to say that there were no other students that were not accepting of me. But I think the fact that it was specifically teachers and administration that were more discriminatory, that power that they already have as, you know, adults and leaders in that setting is going to be a lot more impactful. And they also, I can just say that they didn't understand what was happening, I think, and they didn't want to have to deal with the fact that they might have to consider their own biases. And I think a lot of the times they also assumed that I was the only trans person at that school. And I know for a fact that I was not. And so I think that also applies to all schools, and that this legislation specifically is assuming that there's very few trans people, or that they're just attacking a few, but this is sending a message to all trans people in schools and all trans students. And I think that I don't know if it's a generational thing, or I think that part of it is definitely, but I also think that people just need, a lot of times people need to be educated and are not given the opportunity to learn about trans issues, because they're just being demonized, and that's the only exposure people have.
Thank you, Fox. Joe? Yeah, sorry.
I want to just say again, thank you to Fox and also to Chase, who has also spoken as a transgender individual on this. The questions that I get more than anything is trying to understand the transgender, understanding. We have so much education to do on this. And this is more trans voices that we have heard around this debate so far than ever before. And it's great that we have two that are highlighted. We need to continue to lift up trans voices and educate on this matter, to understand this issue, to help stop the misunderstanding and the discrimination that's coming from it. Businesses are again pushing so hard within corporate America to bring trans voices forward and to better understand this issue, the understanding around sexual orientation and gender identity, which are two very different things that encompass the LGBT community. And I'm happy to see corporate America doing it. We need to do more of it as community members. We need to do more of it as society to continue this education. And it starts with hearing directly from those individuals. Again, thank you, Fox and Chase, for speaking today.
Absolutely. For Aly and Fox, if you would like to follow up, Laura Thompson from Mother Jones says, even if the anti-trans healthcare ban does not pass, how readily accessible is gender-affirming care for minors in Tennessee?
I can start off, I guess. I think it's already quite a process to get to. I know that at least when I was going through that, at least starting out, I definitely had to go to therapy for a while, get a letter from a mental health professional, get a letter from general practice doctor before I can even start trans affirming healthcare. So it's already not accessible to everybody, or anybody who wants it. And I think that also depends on whether you have supportive parents or not, or whether you have a supportive doctor who's going to be able to find you a mental health professional who is accepting of trans people. So I think that a lot of it is just being able to have a supportive network of people, which I was very lucky to have. And I know that not a lot of people are, and some people may start that process through their own school. So if the school is not accepting of a student, or the school doesn't have people that it knows that can help the student, then they're not going to be able to access that healthcare. So making it illegal is just another step in preventing that. But it's not like it's already something that you can just, walk in and just ask for some hormones and just get it whenever you want. It's a pretty complicated process. So I don't think people realize that it's not a really easy thing to do.
And if Aly or Chase Strangio would like to add anything, thank you, Fox, for the response.
I think
Aly,
Chase would be a better, I was just saying, I think Chase would be a better person for that.
I think that, one of the things animating this conversation is this suggestion that kids are getting access first and foremost to surgery at a young age, which is absolutely never happening. This is not what we're talking about when we're talking about healthcare for trans youth. And a lot of what we mean when we're talking about healthcare for trans youth is gender affirmation, is being able to go to school, consistent with who you are, and then, with supervision from a doctor and support of parents, as Fox mentioned, it is not easy to access, puberty blockers and hormones, and it's only done under the supervision of a doctor and an endocrinologist, with, the backing and support of all available science, the American Academy of Pediatrics, the American Medical Association, the Pediatric Endocrine Society, and there is an issue with, having the care available at all, and courts have routinely struck down restrictions on care to transgender individuals. And so this is another example of, a sweeping piece of legislation that at its core misunderstands the science and the lived realities of transgender people's lives, and that when challenged in courts, courts are very keen on striking down this type of sweeping legislation that doesn't have a basis in science and doesn't comport with the realities of what the provision of this care actually looks like. I think it's sad that we are moving in the direction of making healthcare inaccessible to people, criminalizing doctors for providing standard of care medicine in a time of pandemic when, states need to attract doctors, states need to, support the expansive access to medical care. And what we're seeing instead are these efforts to criminalize and restrict care that deters the practice of medicine altogether at a time when we need it the most.
Thank you, Chase. Joe, we have a number of business questions. If we can just start with what are the Stella, you with the Tennessean asks, what metrics are being used to estimate economic damage that Tennessee may suffer? Muted.
Again, for reference, the adoption bill was passed in January of last year, and I'm aware of the 14 conventions that canceled after that passage of that one bill. January, of course, was followed up by March and the complete and utter shutdown of the convention and tourism industry with COVID-19. So we can't really track that bill's full extent of the passage of that bill's fallout for the adoption bill. By the way, of those 14 conventions, I wrote personal letters to 7 of them, asking them to reconsider and come to Tennessee. We work to stop these bills from passing, but then we have to do we have to switch to handling the fallout, because the fallout affects our members and our businesses and our local economy. So that's always fun, but important. I mean, we would rather not have the fallout happen. To the point of other data, so we can't use 2020 and the adoption bill for reference. So if we go to the counseling law, which passed in 2016, and it was discriminatory and received national attention, the impact of groups that were definite and canceled due to the counseling bill: 3 bookings, almost 7,000 room nights, 3.4 million in direct visitor spending. Impact of groups that were in lead status but chose a different destination due to the counseling bill, that's 11 bookings. See, it's those that really jump up, and that's where we were last year with adoption with those 14. 11 bookings, 116,000 room nights, 66.4 million in direct visitor spending. And then the impact of groups that won't even send us a lead anymore due to the counseling bill and other discriminatory legislation, that's unknown. We can't track that. And then COVID impacts, in 2019, the industry generated a record 7.5 billion in direct visitor spending, 1/3 of all visitor spending statewide, and attracted more than 16.1 million visitors. We're not going to be anywhere near that this year or for the foreseeable future. So anything that takes away from that number, like discriminatory bills, harms that business, that economy, and overall the state. I'm happy to drop those statistics in the chat. Those are gathered and reported on by the Nashville Area Convention and Visitors Corporation. And I'd reach out to them, or I'd put you in contact with them for further information.
Thank you, Joe. We do have, we're going to spend maybe just a few more minutes on the virtual press conference. Joe, we do have.
Can I add something quick? I just got news from South Dakota, and I think it's important to note that the Board of Regents from the NCAA is currently testifying in opposition to a comparable sports bill in South Dakota that looks exactly like the bill from Tennessee, indicating that such a bill is in violation of NCAA policy, and there will be consequences for passage. So we know when North Carolina passed HB2, they lost the Final Four championships, another revenue, a massive revenue loss for the state. This is, an important development in terms of the economic consequences of this type of legislation that Tennessee, I think, should be aware of. We now know that the NCAA is making clear that this type of legislation is in direct violation of their policy, and that states could risk losing major championships and the ability to host those championships. And that's currently happening right now in South Dakota over HB 2017 in South Dakota, which looks exactly like HB3 here in Tennessee. Just wanted to make sure everyone was aware.
Thank you, Chase. Joe, and this may be our final question, if there are no more coming through the chat. But both Selena Haynes from Connect and Vivian Jones from Main Street Nashville are interested to learn about if FIFA or other teams have spoken to legislators with regards to these measures, and also if you could speak to further economic risk to the Nashville area the bill poses, and how many conventions there are. How many conventions are there? Projections of economic tourism losses at risk, which I think you've touched on some, but specifically with FIFA and any major sports teams that may have been publicly or behind the scenes involved with lobby efforts.
Yeah, 2 years ago, yes, 2 years ago now, because 2020, we didn't do anything, but 2019 during the legislature, the NFL draft was in town. Legislators were down seeing the draft and experiencing the draft, and the NFL and the Tennessee Titans made it very clear that if discriminatory legislation passed that year, that this would be very hard to recreate, if at all possible. The World Cup, the bid for that, FIFA has made it very clear with their bid process. They've had all local municipalities that are bidding for a game. It's in North America, so there's 24 cities. Nashville is one of those. All of those had to do with a human rights study, talking about the impacts to the issues around human rights. And FIFA is looking at that when they make their decisions of where they're going to play their games. LGBT equality, anti-trans legislation was one of the top concerns for us here in Nashville that could harm us, our ability to get a 2026 bid. This issue is also up in Georgia and Florida and Texas and the other states where this anti-trans athlete bill has been put out there as an issue, and we're seeing it discussed in other legislatures. All of those have bids out for FIFA World Cup game. The NFL has made it clear that they'll carefully look at any of their events. So the Super Bowl, again, I bring that up. And then Chase's point with the NCAA and what they're saying in South Dakota, that would directly affect us in the basketball tournament that we love to have come to this state. To step back, I've talked a lot about tourism, but remember on that question of the broader, is there other economic impact? Yes, there is. Businesses in the past, we've had corporate businesses that made statements in past years that they will not expand jobs here. They will not relocate from places like California and New York to places that are discriminatory. That is what has sparked this interest in discriminatory legislation by companies, because it affects them. It affects their abilities to attract and retain talent. So we've had major companies relocate or expand jobs here in Tennessee, and they see this as an issue, so they're speaking out on it. And yes, Nashville garners the majority of that attention with businesses coming here, but it's also all across the state. We had a large corporation speak out last year around the adoption bill to make sure that the rural representative in that district knew that they had 400 plus jobs in their district, and that this company believed discriminatory practices were wrong. Those are the discussions that businesses are having in the halls of the Capitol to make sure these legislators know discrimination is bad all across the state of Tennessee. We are against this and stand against this all across Tennessee. It's not just Nashville-based businesses speaking out. If you look at our open letter, you can see the broad geographic makeup of the letter signers, the businesses across the state.
Thank you so much. And with that final response, I'd like to thank all of the media for tuning in, for those that are viewing on Facebook, and a special thank you to all of our speakers, Fox Schweiger, Aly Chapman, Chris Sanders, Joe Woolley, Chase Strangio, and Cathryn Oakley. Thank you so much, and we're going to conclude today's event.
Thank you.
Thank you.